everybody. Super excited about this week's video. Another highly requested video, by the way. We're talking about optimal eating, intermittent fasting, and weight management. Joining me is my friend, Dr. Nashat Latib. She really specializes in functional medicine as well as natural fertility. And before we started even shooting this video, we're so aligned in ideology that it's just joyful to be with somebody where, you know, your ideas just bounce off and you're like, yes, I get it. I get you. So go ahead and talk about what it is that you do, Nashat.
I am a board-certified physician, and I specialize in functional medicine as well as natural fertility. I also subspecialize in detoxification and really the power of food as medicine. My approach to health is really unique in the sense that I am traditionally trained, but I really believe that we need to kind of meld the best of both worlds, traditional medicine and functional medicine. And by no means is functional medicine meant to replace traditional medicine. The traditional medicine model is really based on acute care, whereas functional medicine is really based on root cause and reversal of disease as well as prevention of disease.
Right.
And we focus on both longevity as well as health span.
What encompasses functional medicine? It's become such a big buzzword these days, but I think sometimes people get lost in what it means.
I'll give you an example. If somebody's got high sugar, right? In the traditional world, we would say you've got diabetes, here's a medication you have to take for the rest of your life.
Right.
In functional medicine, I say your body is expressing symptoms of hyperglycemia. Let's figure out why your body is doing that, and let's fix the root cause of it so that you don't need medication.
Yeah.
So that we can get you off medications. And how do we do that? We do that with lifestyle modifications and using food as medicine, because food is just as powerful as anything that would be in any little prescription bottle. In fact, I personally believe it is more powerful.
I agree with you. Let's talk about why this is all so important. You know, you brought in some stats about women, and you were asking me what the age range of this audience is, and I was telling Dr. Nashat that it's anywhere from late 30s, early 40s, all the way through 70s. I've had, a few 80-somethings say, hey, I'm here too. So let's talk about why it's so important to be healthy at this age and what starts to happen to us at this age.
Yeah, so, statistically, 2/3 of women between the age of 40 and 50 are overweight, and half of them are obese. And actually, from the ages of 50 to 60 and onwards, women on average gain about 1.5 pounds per year, which is shocking, right? And I think that, in the traditional world of medicine, you might go to the doctor and you're told everything's normal, and you know what, you're just getting older. And I do not prescribe to that belief at all.
Not at all.
I don't believe that it is a normal function of aging. I believe that we are empowered to take control of our bodies and that our bodies do have an innate ability to heal itself. Yeah. And there are so many choices that we can make to optimize the process and ensure that that doesn't happen if that's not what we want.
Sure. So I wanted to put on display what you said was the number one thing to look for, and that is color in food. So let's tackle the first thing, the most important thing. When you're out shopping for food, what is it that you should be looking for?
I always tell my patients and my clients to focus on perimeter shopping. Because if we think for a minute, what happens when you walk in the grocery store and you walk around the perimeter, right? Just mentally walk through that exercise. You're going to find the first thing is fresh produce, right? We keep going around, we're going to see lean proteins and so forth. So if you stick to the perimeter of the store, usually those things require refrigeration. And they are perishable, right? In the center of the store are the non-perishables. And those are often loaded with lots of chemicals and preservatives, which is a reason they can live on the shelf for a long time.
Right.
And I always kind of say anything that's not going to go bad is probably not good for your body. So if you focus on whole foods, and I also tell my patients count colors, not calories.
Count colors. How does that work?
So just what you see here,
right?
right? You want your plate to be as colorful as possible. There are red foods, orange foods, yellow foods, green foods, purple foods, brown foods, and white foods.
Right.
But you really want to focus on the colors. So if you can stay away from as much white and brown and get as much color as possible, the thing in the food that gives its color are phytonutrients.
Yes.
And phytonutrients are these powerful, like, molecules that supercharge your body and your cells. And they're loaded with micronutrients and macronutrients. Well, the macronutrients are proteins, fats, and carbs, but they're much more loaded with vitamins, minerals, and lots of amazing things that revitalize ourselves and give ourselves life.
You know, this was the one thing that I love that you mentioned, because I think sometimes people feel like they are a victim to their genetics, right? And so you were saying that we have the power in the choices that we make to change how our cells operate and behave. That's a powerful statement.
Absolutely. And it is the concept of epigenetics. And so all of us, right, have our DNA. And the simplest way to think of it is your DNA is the gun, but your lifestyle choices and what you put in your mouth are the triggers. So we can't change our DNA, but we can optimize our DNA to serve us. And we can do that by setting our bodies up for success. And each of our little genetic variants might need a different type of support. That is one of the things that I specialize in my clinic, is I do extensive genetic analyses and come up with personalized life plans for patients so that they can optimize their genetics. And we can, for instance, if you have a predisposition for diabetes or cardiovascular disease, there are very specific things that you can do to keep that gene from expressing itself. It's really quite powerful.
Like what? What would be an example in that case?
For instance, if you have a genetic variant that promotes inflammation, for instance, in maybe your cardiac cells, we could easily add some anti-inflammatory foods into your daily diet, or use a supplement, for instance, something like EGCG, which is the antioxidant that is in green tea. So by taking a supplement, it's actually a much more concentrated form. It's completely natural. There really aren't side effects, and you can take it indefinitely.
You talk about what it is that we need to incorporate in our diet. What are some of the first things that you tell people to kick to the curb?
Okay, that's a big question. I love
it. Go for it.
Well, the interesting thing is, if we look at the research and the science, there are these categories of what I call high-fi foods, which are highly inflammatory foods.
Yes.
And the highly inflammatory foods, according to the research, more than 90% of the population have an intolerance to one or more of those foods. So one of the first things I do when I work with my clients and my patients is I put them on what's called an elimination diet. It's not forever. It's just eliminating inflammatory foods so that we can decrease our inflammation, start healing our gut, and start down that path to healing. So what are those highly inflammatory foods? Everybody wants to know, right? So gluten, dairy, corn, peanuts, soy, artificial sweeteners, and sugar. When I do my detox program, I always also ask my clients to eliminate caffeine and alcohol for 4 weeks. Caffeine is actually, unfortunately, something that I think in this modern day we've become very dependent on.
Addicted to.
Yeah, exactly. But the problem is, just as...
I'm confession of a caffeine addict, so I get it.
Yeah, but if we can limit our caffeine, we can actually empower our body to thrive. And what most of my patients and clients find is that once they get rid of the caffeine, they actually have more energy than ever.
It's amazing.
Which is shocking, right? And it really comes down to biochemistry, because when we consume caffeine, it actually causes those same ebbs and flows as sugar does on a biochemical level. So when we eat sugar, our insulin rises, right? Because it's trying to scoop up the sugar and store it. And caffeine has a very similar effect. So when our sugar drops, all of a sudden we think we're hungry. We start to feel maybe a lull in energy, and the same thing happens with caffeine.
Yeah.
So by eliminating caffeine, it's amazing how much energy a lot of my patients and clients have. And it's not forever. I'm not saying don't ever have coffee. I'm just saying everything in moderation.
Yes.
You know, I'm kind of an 80% of the time person. I say we can do anything 80% of the time. It's really hard to do anything 100% of the time.
Sure.
So in my practice, I don't ever tell my patients that you have to do something 100% of the time.
That's good, because then it won't be doable.
Exactly.
People just burn out. You mentioned alcohol. Is all alcohol created equal? I mean, we've heard about the health benefits, for instance, of red wine and resveratrol, right?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, you're absolutely right. All alcohol is not equal. Ideally, if you look at the Mediterranean diet, right, and we wanted to talk about the centenarian parts of the world, of blue zones, right? There's a lot of red wine as a part of the Mediterranean diet because of the health benefits.
Yes.
However, how wine is produced has changed over the years. So the mass production of red wine, unfortunately, has made it such that it's not as good for us. So ideally, we want to get wines that are organic and that are produced the way wines were back then. Right?
And how do you find that?
So, I mean, I personally go to places like Dry Creek Wines and Scout and Cellar Wines. You can sometimes find them in the stores, but you have to be really knowledgeable and you have to do your research. I would say probably less than 3% of the world's wines are made this way today. So it's not easy to find them, but they're out there.
And what's the difference in how they're made?
So they're fermented, for instance, over time.
Yeah.
So the wines that are good for us and don't have additives are probably fermented, 12 months, 18 months, however long it takes.
Right.
When they mass produce wine, they speed up the process because they add enzymes. They also add thickeners. In a traditional bottle of wine that you might get when you go to a restaurant, you'll probably find things like megapurple, ferrocyanide, and all sorts of other, probably over 300 types of preservative and chemicals are found in our wines, and it's not regulated.
Fascinating. I didn't know that.
Yes, it's not regulated.
Okay, so you've got to look for organic and wines that have been fermented over time. I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm spending a lot of time on wine.
Handpicked also.
Handpicked.
So if you get, small family vineyards that have handpicked grapes,
Yes.
that makes a huge difference too.
Fascinating.
Because then it's produced kind of the good old-fashioned way.
Right. We've figured out the good foods. I mean, you've got colorful foods, you have produce, healthy fats, nuts, avocados, things like that. I assume lean protein as well to get that balance. So sort of walk us through a day of what would be an optimal way to eat. And now let's start incorporating the biggest question that I get, and that is intermittent fasting, the different models for it, how it works, and most specifically, what it's doing in our bodies.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I definitely don't think that, I'm going to say something controversial, I don't think that breakfast is the most important meal of the day.
Me either, by the way.
So just by eliminating breakfast, we can decrease our caloric intake by 20 to 40%, which is incredible.
Explain why you say that, because that's important. I'm sure people at home are saying, "What? Wait a second. I wake up famished. I live for breakfast. Why can we skip it, and why is that healthy?"
So we can talk back on evolution just for a minute.
Sure.
Right? So, I mean, fasting is something that has been in existence over millennia. Right? If you think back into the day, we were all hunters and gatherers, and it took us time to collect our food. So we have actually evolved to be able to sustain long periods of fasting. Our bodies are actually originally built that way. And it's the industrialization of society and the changes, even as recently as since the 1970s, that we've gotten to this habit of continuously eating all day and snacking because, guess what, we're spending so much time in front of technology and in front of screens, right? So we've become accustomed to this continuous eating process, but actually fasting is good for us. And we'll talk about a little later the people that it's not good for, because there are some exceptions to the rule, as there are with every rule.
Sure.
But in terms of intermittent fasting, there are lots of different ways to fast. So the most common one that most people kind of subscribe to is the 16 and 8. And what that means is that we are fasting for 16 hours of our day and we are eating for 8. There are all sorts of variations on that, and that is flexible, right?
Sure.
So what I love about intermittent fasting is that it's very, very flexible, and it's simple, and really anybody can do it. So when you're starting out, you could even do a 12 and 12, and that would be perfectly reasonable. And if we want to talk about fat burning and kind of talk about some of the biochemistry behind fasting, well, there's a lot of biochemistry, but we don't get into our fat burning mode really until the 12th to 16th hour of the fast. So I do know some people that will fast a little bit longer. Some days they might do the 20-hour fast and eat everything in 4 hours.
Got it.
And I do also want to point out that we're not eating less. We're eating in a subscribed time frame, and we're eating the way that we've talked about eating, which is whole foods, colorful, healthy fats, lean protein, and how you source your protein. That's the one thing we forgot to touch on, is really, really important. So you do want to do wild-caught fish, and you want to do grass-fed beef,
right? Organic meats, I'm sure, as often as you can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If your fast is being broken during a time when you're dining out at a restaurant, and I know this is a biggie too, and I've always said, you can order off menu. The chef can create what it is that you want. So if you're not seeing what you need on the menu, you can have them custom create, right?
Absolutely.
And if that's the case, what should you be ordering out?
Yeah. So, I always say, fill up your plate with mostly vegetables.
Yeah.
And you want to also be portion controlled when it comes to your lean protein. So most women are probably, actually really most people, even men, the range is 4 to 6 ounces,
right?
Which is really a lot less than what we're putting on our plates, in a typical American environment. But 4 ounces for women is typically what we're looking at, and 6 ounces for men. And then we really do want to stick to lean proteins. And if you're going to have a carb, you want a complex carb.
Right.
So things like quinoa would be a lot better than, for instance, doing pasta.
So what are the benefits to our body? What's going on when we are limiting the amount of time where we're eating? We're expanding the time where we're not eating. We've been told we should be eating 3 to 5 meals a day, but this goes in the face of that belief system. So what's happening to our bodies as we incorporate this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's talk first about what happens in a fed state and in a fasted state.
Right.
So in a fed state, essentially when we eat, our insulin level goes up. And our insulin's role is to grab glucose and put it away. That's what our bodies do. And where do we store it? We store it predominantly in our skeletal muscle and in our liver. But once those storage units are full, we turn it to fat. Now, in a fasted state, our insulin levels are low. And so what's happening when our insulin levels are low is that sugar is being released. And so we're essentially able to go into a fat-burning mode where we are going to the fat stores, which can come from a variety of places. They can come from, the rolls that we can feel and touch. But the beautiful thing about intermittent fasting is that we also tap into our visceral fat stores. And our visceral fat is our fat that we can't see. It's the fat that is wrapped around our organs inside our body, but is also the number one risk factor for chronic disease, such as cardiovascular disease and diabetes, hypertension, and so on and so forth. So by tapping into those fat stores and decreasing our visceral fat, we are actually, increasing our longevity, decreasing the risk of chronic disease, and so forth. And what's happened over the course of time as our eating patterns have changed is that, we've had an escalating number of cases and percentage worldwide of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and so forth. And by using this strategy, we can actually reverse that process.
What are some of the diseases that can be reversed? And we're talking about some biggies here.
Yeah. Well, inflammation in general decreases when you're using a strategy like intermittent fasting. But it's amazing. Not only are you decreasing your risk and possibly reversing heart disease, hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes, we're also decreasing our risk for cancer and also, which is a big one for me personally, is Alzheimer's disease.
Yes. Because we as women are living longer.
Yes.
And that's becoming a huge factor.
Yes.
In what impacts our later years. And as we talked earlier, this is about longevity and, as you like to say, a health span.
Yes.
Because it's one thing to live a long time, But you don't want to just say that you've reached a certain age and then the quality of your life in those later years isn't good. We want to have a great health span. And so what you're saying is this way of living, because that's what I believe it is, it's not a diet, sets us up for a health span. And there are even parts of the world called the blue zones,
Yes,
where this is taking place.
Yes, absolutely. So the blue zones are amazing, and they have been the place where a ton of research has gone into, because in the blue zones are the areas of the world where the highest percentage of centenarians, meaning people that live past the age of 100, reside. And so the researchers went into these areas and they really dug deep into what is the secret.
Yes.
Right? What is the secret? And if you're wondering where these blue zones are, there's 5 of them in the world. And one of them is in, let's see if I can remember them all, Okinawa, Japan. And then there is, I forget the name of the town, but it's in Costa Rica.
Yes. And there's one in Sardinia.
There's one in Sardinia.
Right.
And
there's one in the States, right?
Yes, there is. There's one in Greece.
Okay.
And then the States is Loma Linda, California.
Why is it? What did they find in Loma Linda that allows for this to happen?
Yeah, it's so fascinating because I had the same question. I was like, California?
Right.
What are the chances in California that there's a lot of centenarians, right? It goes against everything that we're talking about, right? Well, the reality is that in Loma Linda, California, there is a population of Seventh-day Adventists that don't believe in the consumption of alcohol or sugar. They don't believe in like TV and screen times and so forth.
Right.
And so they pretty much lead the same life as people in the other blue zones of the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, and in all of the blue zones, I'll also add, people always ask me, like, what is the one diet? You know, and I'm not a supporter of the word diet for exactly what you're saying, because diets don't feel sustainable.
Sure.
Right? I more think of it as a lifestyle or a way of eating. But in all of these places, they really prescribe to a Mediterranean way of eating, because we're looking at, you know, healthy fats, so things like, you know, olive oil and avocados and nuts and seeds. They're looking at, you know, thoughtfully sourced lean protein, and then a ton of course, natural produce.
Yeah.
Are all colors of the rainbow.
Yeah.
So it's funny, with a lot of my patients and clients, I'll have them do a food journal. And most people are confused when they look at my journal because it looks a lot different than what they would get traditionally, you know, from a nutritionist. And it's because I have check boxes for colors, because I want them to check off what colors they ate with each meal, because it's so powerful.
Sure. And I think, too, important to factor in is just lifestyle and quality of life.
Yes.
In those blue zones, there seems to be, from what I've read and seen, a greater sense of community.
Yes.
And a reduction in stress. And it's like you mentioned, they don't seem to be caught up in this vicious cycle of life of consumption in terms of screen time, computer time, work, stress. I mean, there's a definite relaxation that seems to be taking place.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a huge part of health, wellness, longevity, and health span is community and connection. It's a fundamental need of each and every one of us. So ensuring that you have a lifestyle that promotes family, community, connection, ways to decrease stress in your life. So I believe that every single person should have some way of decreasing stress. And it could be different for everybody.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I talk about meditation a lot because that's a really fundamental part of my personal practice. But, you know, meditation might not be for everybody. But what I say is that meditation doesn't have to be thought of as within a box, right? There's a lot of different ways that we can meditate. We can meditate by gardening.
Yes.
We can meditate by going for a walk. We can meditate by breathing. You know, there are so many different ways to get into that relaxation state, and I just think that every single one of our viewers should really try to wrap their heads around that and think about what brings you that sort of peace and joy.
And you did mention in the beginning that there are people who should not partake in intermittent fasting. Who would fall in that category?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I generally tell people who are diabetics, it's probably not a good idea to do that. And I don't say never. I just say, you know, those are the people that I would suggest do it under the guidance of their doctor or medical professional of their choice. Anyone who is too young or too old, and by that I mean probably less than 17 and older than 70.
Sure.
People who are breastfeeding or are pregnant, I definitely wouldn't want them to prescribe to intermittent fasting without the guidance of a medical professional.
Right.
And then anyone with any heart or kidney issues should also probably steer clear without proper guidance and support.
How does exercise factor into this? What kinds of exercises should you be thinking about?
First and foremost, I don't prescribe to the exercise more, eat less phenomenon that we have been taught in the more traditional paradigms of, diet and lifestyle. I really think there's been a drastic shift away from that model, and I think how we exercise is so critical based on where we are in our lives and what is going on. One of the things that I talk to my patients a lot about is stress. And what most people recognize as stress is actually a very limited and narrow-visioned view of what stress really is, because there are really three forms of stress that affect us. There is the emotional stress, which we all know and acknowledge and recognize.
Sure.
When we're having a difficult period in our life or with family, with work. That's stress we all understand and recognize. I think the two forms of stress that are widely under-recognized are forms of dietary stress. So, for instance, if we're eating too many processed foods or too much sugar or too much alcohol, or maybe just not eating a consistent way, so irregular eating can also cause stress on the body. And then the last category of stress is hidden stress, and basically hidden forms of inflammation, which could be, a pathogen in your gut or, leaky gut, which is something that people are talking about a lot and something that I see a lot in my practice and help a lot of my patients with is leaky gut. The reality is that the way our bodies experience stress is all the same. So whether you have been eating irregularly and a lot of sugar and processed food, or you have a tiger jumping at you, the biochemistry of what's happening in our body is the same. So when we circle back and pull that into fasting, when we are in a fasting state, if you're in your equilibrium state and everything is good and your body is not stressed, those are the times where you really want to do more active, aerobic, heart rate elevating exercises.
Right.
But when you are starting off in intermittent fasting and say you decide after watching us that you want to try this amazing and transformational strategy, you really want to focus on restorative exercises. I know you're a big believer of yoga.
Yes.
So things like yoga or Pilates, low impact sort of flow exercises are more restorative. So you're still giving your body all the benefits of exercise, but you're not causing more stress and inflammation, and you're not causing more oxidative stress.
Makes sense. We have a couple of bottles of water
Yes.
in front of us.
Yes.
The importance of hydration and what would be considered optimal hydration.
Yeah, that's a great question and one of my favorite things to talk about because most of us don't drink enough water. The way you calculate how much water you need is you take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2, and that is the number of ounces you need in a given day.
Right.
That's without exercise. If you go and do hot yoga, right, which is going to be you're going to sweat a lot during that type of exercise, you probably want to increase that amount of water consumption by anywhere between 30 to 50%, depending on how much you've sweat. Generally speaking, for most overall healthy people, you really can't drink too much water. Your body is going to dispose of what you don't need.
Right.
I mean, obviously there are exceptions to every rule. So if anybody out there has, conditions like congestive heart failure and so forth, or any sort of kidney disease, obviously this doesn't apply to you.
Sure.
You do want to talk to your medical professional about exactly how much water you should consume. But for the rest of us, half your body weight in pounds, in ounces, is what you want to drink on a daily basis.
Why is that?
Well, because our body is mostly composed of water. And water is needed for pretty much every essential cellular function. So without it, our body is actually not able to do what it needs to do. And we're not also able to detoxify appropriately. Detoxification is a huge part of our body's way of getting rid of things that don't serve us and absorbing the things that do serve us and water is the vehicle for that. So when our bodies are actually working properly and detoxifying, our body is actually taking fat-soluble toxins, converting them to water-soluble toxins, and then we're eliminating them from our body through our breath, our sweat, through urination and defecation. But we need water to do all of that.
Walk us through then what a typical, you said the 16-8 is probably ideal for most people, right? What would be your first meal? Walk us through how we should eat for those 8 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, pretty much you want to eat everything that you would eat over the course of a day in that smaller time frame. So it's not about necessarily changing the way you eat. I mean, yes, we've talked about how I'm assuming that everyone is already going to change the way they're going to eat, right? So we're sticking to a predominantly whole foods diet, Mediterranean, but you want to eat everything during that more narrow window. I also want to say that your time frame is absolutely flexible.
Sure.
So I know people that prefer to have dinner at 5 o'clock and then, you know, their eating time in the morning might be a little bit earlier. So it's the wonderful thing about intermittent fasting is that you can customize it for your lifestyle.
Yes.
And in terms of what you want to eat, I always want everyone to kind of break their fast with some sort of protein, and having, a protein and a complex carb, which can be in the form of, fruit, or, a sweet potato, something like that. Those are wonderful ways to break your fast. And you do also want some sort of healthy fat. So kind of making sure that you have every piece of the puzzle on your plate is essential. Now, at nighttime, depending on what's going on in your body, some people may benefit from eating less carbs, or eating predominantly plant-based. I find that those are kind of the two winning strategies.
Right.
Eating a plant-based dinner, by not eating a lot of protein, what happens a little bit sooner than if you do eat protein with dinner is that you go into the biochemical state where your human growth hormone goes up, which promotes, the preservation of lean body mass, and also helps a lot with mental clarity, as well as melatonin goes up, which really helps with sleep.
Yeah.
Yes.
What are your thoughts, too? Because, for a lot of people, this could be a profound change, and that can have an impact on your digestive system. Some people have a harder time breaking down, like cruciferous vegetables. They can, things can change and make it a little bit uncomfortable. So do you recommend certain supplementations, digestive enzymes, probiotics, prebiotics to help accompany something like this?
Yes, absolutely. I think a digestive enzyme is fabulous. I use them personally. A lot of my patients use them. I think, unfortunately, because most of us live in an inflammatory lifestyle just by virtue of living life in an industrialized society, we can't really prevent inflammation. And so I'm constantly personally working to decrease my level of inflammation, but I always know when I need a little support. And a digestive enzyme is a lovely, lovely way to do that. I do have a few favorites for sure, which are available on my website. And, so we can link those in. But digestive enzyme, definitely, and you can take it actually with every meal. They help break things down. A probiotic is really fabulous also. I will say that, a sort of a general probiotic is probably safest, but probiotics I also think are somewhat widely understood in the sense that there are various strains that serve different purposes. So my sort of general rule is if you take anything and you don't feel good, make sure you stop. And of course, see your medical professional.
Right.
I would say probably my baseline supplements that I think are overall safe are to take, for instance, a multivitamin. Most of us are low in vitamin D. I have yet to find a single patient that has come with an acceptable vitamin D level.
Because we're not in the sun anymore.
We're not in the sun. And, when we were talking about genetics earlier, there are some of us that actually have genetics that make it more difficult for us to convert vitamin D from the sun. So in those patients, I will have them take as much as, 5,000 units of vitamin D on a daily basis. And they might need that for the rest of their life. I wouldn't say that's the general recommendation, but I would say, people that I work with personally who have that, we might subscribe to that. So vitamin D, a multivitamin, is definitely safe. Digestive enzymes are definitely generally safe. And omega. Omega is a great supplement to take. A lot of us are not eating enough omegas. That's another thing that I generally see in my patients, is that most of our omega-3 indexes are low. And we can touch on that for just a second. Is, you know, the omega-6s are the omegas that we kind of want to stay away from. They're more inflammatory.
Okay.
And the omega-3s are the healthy omegas. So we find that in salmon, in flax seeds, you know, in avocados. I mean, there's so many sources of healthy omegas out there. But regardless, most of us fall short.
Sure. When somebody embarks on a plan, a lifestyle like this, when you talk about food and you talk about exercise and the right supplementations, what kind of physical changes are they going to start seeing?
And when it comes to intermittent fasting specifically, it takes a little while for our bodies to start changing. And that's actually a good thing, because any change that happens too quickly can also be reversed. As quickly.
You're right. Hence the name dieting.
Yes. So in most of my patients with intermittent fasting, I always say you have a minimum of 30 days before you really start to see changes. And some patients, maybe even 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
So when you start on this journey and start changing your lifestyle, you know, in the beginning, you might have some symptoms that are not going to be exciting. You know, you might have a little constipation. You might have some headaches. You might actually feel a little bit more fatigued. But my plea is to stick with it, because it's amazing the transformation that happens. And it usually happens within a week, most of the time, where all of a sudden overnight, you start to have more energy. Most of my patients experience mental clarity. And you might even start to feel that you have increased exercise endurance, and sort of just an overall joyful feeling, because as you decrease inflammation throughout your body, and especially in your gut, things start to heal, right? And most people don't realize that 80% of our serotonin is produced in our gut. So by decreasing inflammation in the gut, we're actually stabilizing our moods and elevating our moods, let alone our immune system, which is also largely located in our gut, which is, of course, very critical at this time.
Yeah. You know, I so agree with what you're saying and have put into practice now for so long, but I have to tell you that my most creative writing for my book took place during that fasting stage in the morning when I was in that level of what you would call depletion, but it's where I felt that this was functioning at its absolute best. And it's fascinating to see that in yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And the reason that happens is because those are probably the hours that you're actually in ketosis. Right? So your body is basically using fat for fuel and producing ketones, and that is what puts us into that mentally clear state and that creative state. And that is actually something, if you look back in history, some of the most amazing creations, books, inventions have happened in that fasted state.
I truly believe it. I testimony, it is so impactful and so powerful. As you can see, Dr. Nashat Latib has just a wealth of information. Before we wrap it up, there are a couple of interesting facets of what you do that I want to touch upon, and these will be future videos, by the way. There's no way to incorporate all of it in this video. But a couple of things. First of all, you have a detox program. Talk about that.
Yeah, my detox program has been amazing. It started off as a 2-week program, but I actually expanded it to a 4-week program. It's super safe. Anyone can do it. And essentially what we are doing in those 4 weeks is I'm putting you on what's called an elimination diet, where we eliminate all those high-fi foods that we talked about a little bit earlier today. And the first week is really just food. So not only are you in a program, but I'm teaching you how to eat. I'm giving you recipes, shopping lists, a meal plan. So everything is kind of just a plug and play. And all you have to do is follow the plan. Weeks 2 and 3, we actually build in a couple of shakes that really focus on upregulating liver detoxification. phase 1 and phase 2, so that we can, again, like we talked about earlier, take fat-soluble toxins and turn them into water-soluble toxins so that we can get rid of them. And the 4th week of the program is really just food again.
Yeah.
Right? So the goal is to transition you on and off this sort of rigorous detoxification period and also teach you how to eat in the process. And it's amazing. My clients who have gone through the program have lost anywhere between 7 to 18 pounds without trying.
Yeah.
My biggest complaint is they can't eat all the food that I want them to eat.
That's amazing.
I mean, it's not calorie restricted.
Yep.
And it's really, really powerful because it's been really transformative and empowering for a lot of the clients who have gone through it, because they've learned, some of them have even learned how to cook. You know, some of them have had, you know, maybe acne that they've suffered with for a long period of time that dissipates.
Yes.
Some of my women who have been going through menopause and having hot flashes, by upregulating detoxification, were able to dispose of, you know, those hormone imbalances. And so there's a massive reduction in hot flashes.
Yeah.
So it's powerful.
Highly powerful. And that's the beauty of all of this, is that you're not counting calories, you're not measuring food, you know, none of that. It's just eating the right food and knowing what to eat when is the key. So that's super cool that you do that. The other aspect of your practice is that you do functional fertility. You have a natural approach to fertility.
Yes, absolutely. And I am so passionate about it, being a fertility warrior myself. I went through infertility, and it's amazing. Had I known then what I know now, I know that I did not need any of that. I was what everyone calls unexplained infertility, right? So there was no rhyme or reason that I could not get pregnant. And so since, you know, going through the traditional fertility treatments and all the associated challenges, I've realized that there were clear biochemical blocks that were keeping me from getting pregnant. And so now, you know, I'm going out into the world empowering women who are struggling with infertility and trying to help to fill that void before they go to IVF or IUI. That being said, I also see women who have had failed rounds of IVF and IUI, because there is so much that we can do to address the root cause and also address both egg and sperm health, so that getting pregnant naturally, you know, is kind of a side effect.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and we're improving overall health in the process.
Yeah, it's a win-win in every way.
Yes.
And I love just how multi-pronged your functional medicine approach is, because it applies to so many areas of women's lives. And so what I want to do as I conclude the video with Nashat is let you know that in the description portion of the video, we will provide links to the different facets of what you do. So there's one-on-one consultation just about what we talked about, you know, doing intermittent fasting, health and wellness. Also, if people are interested in your detox program, we'll link to that. And if they're interested in your fertility program, we'll link to that as well. And I'm excited to say that if you do want to partake in any of it, she's offering a 10% discount coming through those links and using the code Dominique. So I'm so thrilled to be able to offer that to you, as I know you are as well, and I thank you for that. That's a big deal for my audience.
This is amazing. I'm so excited and passionate about all of these topics, and you know, it really lights me up, and it's kind of the fuel for my day and my life. So you know, anything that I can do to promote wellness and optimize health.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Nashat Latib, you have been a joy. I have
you.
Loved getting to know you. I love being around like-minded women who are warriors for other women to lead better, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. And to me, this is priority one. It really is. So thank you so much. I look forward to future videos with you.
Thank you.
And I look forward to hearing from you and seeing how you incorporate and what you do and what kind of impact it's had in your life. So thanks for being with us. As always, I encourage you to be bold and blessed in everything you do, and see you next Thursday. Bye.
Bye.